Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation today.
Me too. I think it's an important one and not one that typically happens on a lot of forums. So I'm really honored that you're sharing your time and energy with us today. And just really excited to get your insight as well too. So maybe just as we get started, can you just give me or give our audience a little bit of brief of what your experience is previously in the corporate world?
Yeah, so the last 25 years, I have worked in corporate, all different sized companies from Fortune 100s to startups, mostly in Silicon Valley, but leading the people and HR teams for lots of different companies. I'm excited to have this conversation because now my mission is to breathe new life into corporate America. I'm a neurosomatic executive coach. I do conscious leadership advisement for companies. I'm really stepping into a very different era in how do we lead our people and help them from a well-being and high performance perspective.
Amazing, amazing. And I like love the perspective shift. That's exactly what we're trying to do over here too. And I want to kind of get right into it from a
Yeah,
perspective of, I think we know that everyone's aware of burnout culture,
yeah,
what that means and how it affects us as individuals. But I think it's also important to touch on, especially because you've been at the executive level, you've been a VP. You not only see it from how the morale is in the team, but we also know that when you're an executive or a business owner, you have to be aware of costs of the business.
yeah.
So while we can feel burnout as far as just the energy in the business or the morale, there's also a very real perspective as a manager and executive. You're not only responsible for how the team produces, you're also responsible for if the business is profitable. And of course, what we know associated with profit is expenses and costs. So maybe we could start off with just in your time in that world, what you saw in relation to stress and how it played into the people, but then also your perspective of how it did affect the bottom line of the businesses you worked with.
Yeah, and I think being on the HR side, I also had a unique opportunity to see kind of different effects than maybe kind of the rest of the executive team or the leadership team would see. So, um, you know, stress affects everybody. It affects our ability to be productive and highly performing, right? So you have individuals who have always been high performing, always been really amazing at delivering. And as they start to approach kind of more stress, more burnout, you can see that productivity dwindling. You can see their dynamics on the team changing, right? How teams bend and shift when there is more pressure, more stress, more, imminent sense of burnout happening and coming. So definitely, I have watched high performing teams start to kind of head in the wrong direction. I've seen, um, they lose a team member and things start to get tough, right? Then we put more stress and more pressure on the people who remain because someone's out on a leave or someone's out doing something.
Right.
So there's definitely that perspective. Then you see high performers who leave, right? High potential, high performing employees who just are done with the pressure and the stress that is being created. And they walk out with this amazing amount of knowledge, talent, like all the things you don't want walking out the door.
Right.
And that stresses leaders out. It stresses, any leader who has ever had your brightest performer give a resignation knows that pit in their stomach of like, they're a tenfold person. I can't replace them with just one person. So
Right.
there's all of that stress that happens on the team and in leaders. But the bottom line dollars associated with that is staggering, right? From an HR perspective, being the leader of the HR function, many times I would go to leaders and say, look, the cost of leaves, of workers' comp claims, of all of those pieces, people being out because of stress and burnout is huge.
Right.
But quite honestly, the biggest one right now is we are seeing record increases in medical cost increases for companies. So on average in the US for company sizes 500 to 1500, in the past we've seen medical plan increases of 3 to 5%, in some rough years 8%. After COVID, we saw an increase of 8 to 11% in medical costs, kind of overall year over year increases, which is huge.
Wow.
This year, we're projecting 18 to 24%. That is
Wild.
millions of dollars, millions. And all of those things are not necessarily just associated with stress, but if you think about things like autoimmune diseases, psychiatric kind of things, all of those things that are increased when stress increases, the dollars associated with stress and burnout are huge and can't be ignored anymore. We've got to do something differently if we're going to be able to retain and keep talent and keep them high performing and keep our business costs at a reasonable level.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy you shared those statistics, because I think oftentimes with executives or management, like they understand that stress optimization for their staff, again, is important, but whether they're actually doing the math on how much it has cost them up to this point in their business career is another thing.
Yeah.
I know I saw on Forbes, they actually have a calculator where you can do the cost equation of what it costs to turn over an employee. And I know I just read an article from the Financial Post. Obviously, we're in Canada, and the average cost to replace one employee right now in 2024 is about $30,000. So that's just one employee. And then, of course, in that same article, they're projecting that there's about a 22% increase in turnover in 2024 for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking 30K every time, like it doesn't even matter if sales are good, your costs are now being eaten up just from purely that statistic alone, right?
Well, and Gallup and the American Psychology Association have done a lot of studies around engagement. And in the corporate world, we talk about engagement scores all the time, NPS scores, those kinds of things. But if you look at the dollars, 34% of employees are not highly engaged. That is 30% of your workforce who is not performing optimally. And so if we're saying we have this set of people who are stressed and burnt out, taking leaves, not performing as high as they can, and 34% of those people are not engaged and not giving 100%, what you see is then an increase in headcount requests, an increase in opportunities for streamlining processes, and we're not getting any more resources. We're asking our leaders to do more with less. So it's like, actually, you're getting less people, and you're getting people who are not engaged. Like, the cost of this is it just keeps mounting on top of it, stacking on top of itself.
Right.
And there are things we can do. So it's also a preventable problem, right? It's why we're doing the work that we're doing in the world, because it is very costly.
Right. And I love the point that you brought up just about engagement, because I think, the conversation that I've had with a lot of people lately is that, they feel stressed out at work. They feel like they're not engaging in their work. So typically the first line of defense is like, well, I just need to find a new job, or I need to quit my job and switch to something that's maybe more purposeful or passionate, which there's validity to that, of course. But I also believe that the disengagement is purely from the fact that we're all stressed out in all areas of our lives, and our nervous systems don't have the capacity to be engaged. So it's not necessarily the work itself or the job itself. It's the fact that if your nervous system isn't able to actually engage in anything, it doesn't matter what's in front of you, you're eventually going to run into that same wall of just not being there. And I think that's also why it's really important for our companies to have a stress optimization budget, or mental health, or however you want to refer to it, is that they can get their employees re-engaged into the system. But it's more than just making the work interesting. It's about actually nourishing the human first.
Yeah. And I think, you know, especially now with the economy and layoffs and things like that, I'm seeing wellness budgets, or what they consider stress optimization budgets, going away. And sadly, what I would say is that this is not just about well-being. This is not just about, we want to give someone a meditation app, or we
Right.
want, we want you to be happy at work. This is actually about, how do we get our teams, who we're asking to do more with less now, fully optimized to be performing at 100%, to be giving 100%, to be 100% engaged. And quite honestly, what we want from them is what we call discretionary effort. It's the effort that I can't pay them to do. I can't
Right.
coax them to do. I can't push and make them do. They do it because they want to, because they're highly engaged. They're working on impactful work that makes them happy. They have kind of this, appreciation for what they're doing and their role. And that extra push, and that actually where you as an organization make more money, and get more from your employees, they don't do that unless their nervous system has the capacity to expand in that way. So this is not wellness for the sake of wellness. This is actually productivity and hardline goal creation and high performance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think what comes along with that, and I'm sure you've experienced that, is that our approach is against the grain when it comes to, let's call it, hustle culture, right?
Yeah.
And so, this idea of regulating yourself in order to become more productive. I know I've had talks with a couple executives, and their fear is that, if we start introducing stress optimization or these practices, that all of a sudden everyone's going to ask to go on a stress leave, or they're going to just say, I can't handle the job anymore. Like they're almost nervous to open that floodgate up, because they're scared that's going to be the reaction.
Yeah.
Where I've been trying to let them know, it's like, no, that's not the point of this. The point of this is to optimize their stress, to teach them how to lean into this stress, because that's going to allow them to step up in their capacity, step up in their role, and also learn that stress is a necessary part of life. Like we all
Yep.
know, you don't grow unless you're in stressful situations.
Yep.
But the way that stress is invited into your body, the way you regulate it, the way you optimize it, is what we're trying to empower people with, so that they can step up in their roles, so that they can take more accountability, all from that space you're referring to, from an inner willingness, because that's not something any external motivator can get out of them. It has to come from within.
It does. And I think there's a little bit of a myth when, nervous system regulation is fairly new term to the corporate world. And I think there's this myth that, like, we're trying to have everybody calm and their nervous system
Right.
always regulated, and we're just going to move at this very clear snail pace.
Right.
That is absolutely not the case. We
Right.
need sympathetic energy. We need that push. We need stress a little bit, right? But healthy stress, and healthy in the right way. And to exactly what you were saying, we need to help our nervous systems expand the capacity to say, okay, now's a push moment. I need to step up. I need to get that adrenaline going. I need to do those things, but have this very great regulated nervous system that can say, okay, I did it. I did what I needed to do. Now I get to come back to this more regulated state. And I have the capacity to do that when I need to, and get back to where I need to without living there, which is where that stress and burnout is created. So all stress is not created equal.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I just was listening to information. This Harvard Business Review did this study around stress, and they basically took these groups and said, we are going to stress you out in different ways. And in one of the groups, they said, actually, when your heart rate increases, you start to get that additional kind of fight or flight happening. All of that is good for you. It's expanding your oxygen levels. You're going to start to breathe more. You're going to do all of these things. And that is actually going to help you get through this stressful period faster. And then the other group, they didn't tell them any of those kinds of things. And normally what happens in stress is our blood vessels constrict, right? It's why we get heart attacks and like all the things that from bad stress. What
Right.
they observed in this group was that they did not. They actually, their blood vessels opened even more because they were expecting the stress and they were
Mhm.
told that some of the signs and symptoms were good for them and were going to help them push through the stressful situation and then be able to go back to kind of that non-stress place.
Mm.
So they were aware, they were prepared, they knew what to expect, and they were able to get through it faster and performed better than the team that didn't.
Mm. Isn't that fascinating?
So
Hey,
fascinating.
the human like body is just
Yes.
such a technology, and amazing to having the scientific backing of all of this, which I think is really important. Because again, sometimes people think like, oh, they're gonna come in and meditate, or gonna be on this like basic, like, oh, we're just all zen and kumbaya. Like that's not it at all. Like you're exactly right. And same thing, I think from a leadership perspective, like whenever you have a team, all you want is you want your team to be able to rise up more, to take on more accountability, to want to step up in their role. And I always remind leaders, like the reason you're in the position you're in is because you have a higher capacity than your team.
Yeah.
Typically, the higher up on the ladder you go, it's because you have a bigger capacity to deal with the bigger problems, the bigger issues. That's why you're
Yeah.
in your position.
Yeah.
So if we're teaching people how to regulate their stress and optimize their stress, where they feel like they can handle a little bit more of a challenge and a little bit more of a challenge, just as you're saying, then essentially what we're empowering them to do is to rise up in the ranks, right? Which is
Yeah.
what every leader wants out of their team.
Yeah.
So it's exactly like we're not trying to calm everyone down and we're chilling. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just
Yeah.
trying to empower people from an internal state to actually rise up into that, right?
Well, and I think the other thing that sometimes gets overlooked is in a state of strong sympathetic or dorsal energy,
Mhm.
our ability to think strategically, creatively, to execute, all of that is constricted, right? It's all narrowed
Right.
greatly. And so you think about like, especially leaders, you're just talking about how much expanded capacity they have, how much expanded responsibility they have for delivering. And you think about the C-suite, the executives that I'm used to working with, they're responsible for, the CEO has 1,500 people responsible that their lives, right? Livelihood is responsible for them. That's a lot of pressure.
Right.
But when they're making decisions from a regulated place, they actually can see so many more options available to them. They can
Mhm.
help their teams, the way they communicate, the way they make decisions, the way that they step up and step in and lean in. All of
Mhm.
that is so increased from a strategic perspective
Mhm.
when we can get to that place of, okay, I may be stressed out, but my body is regulated enough that the window of opportunity and options is larger
Mhm.
than if I'm in this pure stress place. And their employees can too. I mean, sales teams alone, right? If you think about the conversation you're having with someone trying to sell them something, if I'm in a place of nervousness and scarcity and my nervous system is in fight or flight, my ability to actively listen,
Right.
overcome objections, hear what they're saying, and actually get to the root of the why it's a no and how do we change it to a yes
Mhm.
is severely diminished.
Absolutely.
And if we can open that up, the opportunities are endless.
Absolutely. And it comes back to, and I know this isn't a common word used in the corporate world, but safety, right? Like if I'm the client and you're trying to propose a transaction to me, if I don't subconsciously feel safe with you, I'm
Yeah.
not going to do business with you. And I might not even cognitively know that I don't feel safe with you, but my nervous system can read the fact that you're not present,
Yeah.
you're nervous, you're not regulated, and that the mirror neurons, me attuning to you is not going to happen. And then therefore business walks out the door.
Yes.
And one thing I want to touch on with what you said, like we have to look at stress optimization and nervous system regulation, like giving people these tools as the same level of tool as a CRM system, as efficient email marketing,
Yeah.
as commercials. Like this tool is just as important to your process as all the other things. Every business wants systems. If you can automate and you can put things into effective
Yeah.
systems, the business will run more efficiently. Well, empowering your people with understanding how to optimize your stress is a extremely important system, right? That can be automated in the same way as, again, like a CRM. Like we have to look at it as just as powerful of a tool, more, honestly, even more necessary than the rest of them, right?
I love that you said that because I do think that that's so true. We have put a lot of well-being kinds of things in a bucket of optional, of this is something that's nice to have, or we've put it on an employee's plate. We gave you an app. Go do some meditation, go do some things. And I actually agree with you. If we can embed the tools and the ability to understand what's happening in our own systems, and I even call it with corporate our internal operating system. Like this is how you operate internally.
Right.
And I love what you said earlier about it being kind of that mirroring neurons, and that it's autonomic. It happens. I feel safe with you. My system goes into this. Our bodies are created to do what it needs to do automatically. If we are not paying attention to it, noticing it, really doing what we need to do in order to get it to where we want it to be, then it's happening at us and not for us.
Right.
And these tools are so incredibly simple and easy to use, not hard to implement and teach, right? And something that can profoundly and dramatically change individuals' lives, but honestly, how it shows up in their corporate and their work lives.
Absolutely. And it, again, just like the example you used of a client, like if if the person dealing with them is therefore their ability to creatively find a solution to closing the deal isn't there, and let's say that client does walk out the door, you don't close the business. So, and of course it's going to happen. We can't close every client. We all know that. It's a ratio. We understand that. But, the natural thing would be like, okay, so let's increase our marketing budget. Let's get another commercial out there. Let's do this. Well, what about just shifting that budget into giving that person the best chance of actually capturing that relationship, right? Like what about putting dollars from throwing up another commercial that may be effective or may not,
Yeah.
into actually refining the skills of the people who are capturing these connections. And also, I think, because we've talked about the wellness budget, like many organizations have a sales teaching or sales strategy budget, right? Like
Yeah.
let's teach people how to sell more, which is important. We do have to have those skills.
Agreed.
But what about just the skills of authentic connection,
Yeah.
right? Like I know in my career, I think that's what had gotten me the furthest, was just my ability to connect to people and seeing the dramatic difference from when I was actually connecting in a regulated state
Yeah.
versus a dysregulated state, like, because the dysregulation existed 100%, it did.
Yeah.
But when I took the time to actually regulate myself, like I know at my previous employment, one day my boss walked into my office. He goes, "You're so much nicer to deal with now." And I was like, "Oh wow." I didn't realize it was that bad, but it was because I was dysregulated. And so
Yeah.
my ability to not only connect with my coworkers, but my clients became more effective as well too, right?
Totally. And, there's this concept of co-regulation. And, if you think about that in a sales cycle conversation, exactly like if my nervous system is regulated, I am able to really sit in that place as I'm trying to sell something to you. The likelihood that I help bring yours more towards that ventral vagal regulated state is actually quite high. And so you do it for your coworkers, you do it for the people you're trying to sell to, right? The ability to do that for others because you're coming from a regulated place is actually tremendously supportive and helpful. And it's why a lot of my work is focused on leaders, because we've all had a leader who walks into the room and they're so dysregulated, everybody in the room gets dysregulated very quickly and very easily, right? We've all had that experience. And we've had the opposite, which is when someone walks in and they're cool and collected, they're taking the time to listen, they're taking the time to be thoughtful in how they want to respond, and everybody in the room kind of takes that collective sigh and their nervous systems start to come down a bit, right? And that's the place where we make the best decisions from. And so that co-regulation piece is so incredibly important in the workforce as well, whether you're in sales or other places. I think that's something that also gets overlooked in the grand scheme of how do we, it doesn't mean we have to train every single person. Actually, 25%, if we get the leaders where we need them to, they're regulating their team, they're understanding where they're meeting people, they're understanding the need to create that space where people can talk about where they are, regulate, and get back to it. So there's a lot of opportunity there to influence the rest of the organization.
Right. And again, with that piece of dysregulation amongst leaders, but anyone in the organization, I know for me, what the trick I had played on myself, I guess I'll say that, is that because I was still achieving a high level of results, I figured, well, I'll just keep going. Like it's working. Do you know what I mean? Even though
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping at night, my digestion was off, I was constantly worried, but I was still achieving some goals. So it's like, okay, let's just keep going. But looking back on it, like I was still operating from a disadvantaged point because I wasn't regulated. So cool, I still found some success, but if I would have regulated myself sooner in my career, how many more deals would I have
Yeah.
closed? How much more business would I have earned? You know what I mean? And hindsight's 2020, of course, but I think that's the most important thing is for people to realize is that you are operating at a disadvantage when you're dysregulated all the time. Even if you are getting results, you're not optimizing your performance right now, right?
Yeah.
And and also, I know it might sound not possible because I didn't really believe it either, but you can actually optimize your stress and enjoy the process. Like,
Yes.
you don't have to feel stressed out all the time. You don't have to carry this anxiety in your chest all the time. Like,
Yeah.
I really thought like this is just what high performers do. It's just anxiety all the time here, but I can deal with it. And
Yeah.
that's what I always hear too. I don't know if your clients, but my clients, well, I can handle it. I can handle it. Well,
You can
you though?
until
Right.
your body shuts down, right? I mean, I was the person responsible for taking care of people, and I ended up in the hospital with an autoimmune disease and all of these other things. And being the person supposed to be watching the people, right?
Right.
It will sneak up on you and your body, what stress does to your body, bad stress, right? I think there's this misnomer that all stress is bad stress. And you said it earlier. I don't believe that to be true. We actually need that push. We
Right.
need a little bit of stress to get to these stretch goals, to push a little harder when things get going, when there's an incident or something happening, right? I actually want those fight or flight endorphins to kick in. I want that to happen. It's this, how do we stay out of the bad stress, which is what creates all of this burnout. It creates people needing to take leave. It creates all of these medical issues, quite honestly, that are costing us in our personal lives, but professionally and as an organization, costing us millions of dollars every year. And we have the capacity to do it. It is within us, and it's a knowing, and then it's an understanding how to do it. So it's not unattainable either. It's not like it's something that is only available to elite or for millions and millions of dollars. It's actually not any of that. It's readily available.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because sometimes the other thing too is like because like you talked about with working with the nervous system or stress optimization, they are very simple tools.
Yeah.
And sometimes because they're so simple, no one believes they want to work,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it's that simple. Like I can really all these tens of years of working in anxiety can just go away. Like now the other thing with that is the tools are simple, but we are doing a lot of reprogramming and unlearning in that process. And that honestly is more where the legwork comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's that again, a common thing I've heard with some of my clients, which you may have heard too, because they're all high performers. Well, I know I should do that. I just need to do it. I just need to be more disciplined, or I can learn all that stuff on my own. But then it's also like, okay, so if you can, why haven't you? And
Yeah.
where the conversation typically goes is it's still a capacity issue,
Yeah.
right? it's still you have all these things to take care of, all these people you're responsible for, all these budgets you're responsible for, and then the personal life on top of that. Like, there's your nervous system has now been cued to chaos. So when your nervous system is used to chaos, it's going to typically choose that
Yep.
over the slowing down practices or the regulating practices, because your nervous system has kept you in this survival state for so long, and survival to you has been staying busy and staying in the chaos. So when you hear these, simple tools that can all of a sudden bring you to the other side, it
Yeah.
sounds too good to be true, or it's like life that can actually work. But that's what I think I'm with your what you do and what I do. It's coming in to teach people that, like, there's a way to incorporate things that actually will have profound change on your organization and on your personal life, corporate and personal life,
Yeah.
but it's understanding that we're just trying to shift your capacity into a place that's more regulated so that you can actually handle these things.
For sure. And I find a lot of times with my clients, especially, executives and high performers, is that we're on that go, 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 kind of that hamster wheel of doing things, and our thoughts have taken over. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you when you were kind of in that place, but I hear this from a lot of people, and I experienced it myself. So I really resonates with me. I remember when I was in the hospital for this autoimmune disease and burnout, and I had someone say to me, "Where are you feeling that stress in your body?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "I don't know, let me think about it and I'll get back to you." And the reality is, when we're on that hamster wheel and we're in this go, go, go mode, and we're doing all the things that we have to do to survive, we're not thriving, and we're also not connected with what's happening, which is why burnout sometimes sneaks up on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, whatever your belief systems are, the universe will poke you and be like, "Hey, you need to slow down. Hey, you need to slow down. Hey, you got to do this," right? You're having these little things that are happening to you where it's like, "Oh, why is this why is this coming up now? What is happening?" And what ends up happening is finally it will be like, "And you're done."
Right.
Stop, right? We're
Right.
going to create something in your life where you have no choice. Your body is so intelligent that it's like, "Stop, slow down, slow down, slow down," but we don't listen. We're more in our head and our thoughts, right? We're very kind of in that place because we're go, 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 and we're not listening to what's happening internally. And eventually it will catch up with us. And we see that all the time, right? That's how the stress and burnout will show up for people. It's very scary. It can be very scary for people. And so those high performers that are saying, "Yes, I'll deal with it. I'll do all of these things." It's like we don't yet have the tools, and we haven't worked on getting out of the thoughts in our head
Right.
and more into, like, where is this showing up in my body? Where does stress live? What does it look and feel like? So how do I know when it's coming, and I can do what I need to do to use a tool to expand my capacity or to get myself regulated? If we
Right.
can't even recognize it's coming or it's happening, it makes it really hard to change or do something different.
Right. But absolutely. And I think the other important piece of that too is why it's important to work with people who are maybe more specialized in this area, such as yourself or myself, where we deal with this all the time, is that also not everyone's response to stress is the same.
Yep.
So of course, we talk about fight or flight or freeze, and I find 9 times out of 10, most high performers are typically in the fight or flight stage, right? Like they go go go, and they stay in that chaotic cycle of staying busy. But there's also a very real aspect of when you're overwhelmed in your capacity, and while you can keep doing things, that freeze state will subtly kick in sometimes, where that's when you've been so busy with everything else, and then something comes up and you just keep procrastinating or putting it off. That's a version of freeze, because you don't have the capacity to actually handle that task because you're so overrun, right?
Yeah.
So it's also, when working with people, being able to give them the tools of, like, okay, so what's our response at this time? Because we all know that if we're in a freeze state, we actually have to try and introduce mobilization to the system in a way that's feels safe and feels regulated, right? But if we don't understand how the two can affect our productivity, that can be challenging. And that's why, my approach always with clients is we need to reprogram your relationship to stress so that you can understand how different scenarios affect you. And just as you said, in certain situations, you might want to do more, and in certain situations you might want to do less. Like, we need to reprogram your relationship to it, so that you have the tools to actually, on the fly, whenever it's happening, know what is best for your system at that time.
Yeah, and in a titrated way, right? I think that there's also this, I don't want people listening to this to hear, you're in fight or flight, and the expectation is you're just gonna do this little tool and you're back down to perfect and everything is going and working, right?
Right.
It's the same thing with freeze. It's like I use this analogy of having your foot on the brake and the gas at the same time. Like, your thoughts are like, we gotta go, we gotta move, we gotta do these things, but your foot is on the brake. I'm not asking you to take your foot completely off the brake so that you go 100 miles an hour. I want you to take it a little off the gas and a little off the brake at a time, and we're going to just walk our way back really easily. And so there is a lot to learn in how do we titrate and give our bodies just even 1%, 2% more relief from where we are, so that we can start to build that capacity and we can start to open up that window of tolerance.
Right. And also I want to add to that. It's amazing what you just said, but again, a common thing I hear amongst my high performers is that they often feel guilty or shame when they can't handle the stress the way they think they should be able to. Where this whole our whole society's been programmed to believe that, like, mindset is the savior. It's not. It's not. It is important. Absolutely, it's important.
Yep.
But I think we can all relate to the fact that we've been in situations where you know what you should do, but you're frozen, or you can't activate, or like, I know I need to make this change in life, or I know I need to start going to do this more. I know, but why aren't you being able to activate? That comes back to your physiology, that comes back to your nervous system, and people don't equate the two. A lot of people think they have a weak mindset if they can't push through those things. But there's so much more intelligence at play. And again, I think sometimes when, especially type A's or high performers, when they aren't responding as they think they should, that shame and that guilt that gets thrown on, it's so counterproductive to the process. And I think it's important as humans that we understand that the things that we're typically most shameful of are the things that are what connect us and bond us and have the ability to be our greatest superpower. But I just want to make sure people understand that as well too. It's actually very empowering to take these steps to pour back into yourself in this way.
For sure. I love that you said that, because I also think that I also hear a lot of high performers say, I used to be able to handle the stress. Like, things have changed. And it's, yes, it has. Your body has been taking on this stress for so long. It's now, this is its normal reaction, right? It doesn't get back to the state of regulation like it needs to. And I think it's so important. I get very frustrated sometimes with coaches who, this kind of change your mindset, change your life. Yes, and internally, and from a medical, actual scientific perspective, it is not a just change my thoughts and my entire life is going to change. And there is work that comes behind doing that. There is this, yes, you do need and want a mindset that is supportive and that is getting you the things that you want and need and is giving you kind of that higher lift and that great feeling. But it has to be aligned with what your body is actually experiencing. And you can't affirmation your way out of burnout. And so it's like, there's this recognition that our thoughts have actually part of the problem of getting us into this state. And we've got to spend not all of our time in that hamster wheel of, the brain and the go, and the pushing in that way.
Right. And that's the exact term, the hamster wheel. The hamster wheel never stops. Like, I think we've all know that our brain can go and go and go in whatever direction. Like, that's the one
Yeah.
thing I feel like that's just always running in our bodies is our brain,
Yep.
right? So that's it. Like, if we know we need to have moments of reprieve and moments of being able to slow down, no one wants to think all day long.
Yeah.
Like, we don't. But then when we're attaching like the problem, I don't want to say the problem, but if the problem is the mind, because typically that's where a lot of our stress gets generated.
Yep.
We feel a sensation in our body, we attach it to a story, and that story gets on loop and loop and loop. Like, using that same system to kind of stop it isn't always the most effective. We got to approach it from a different standpoint, right? From a different tool or a different facility, to actually try and counter the stress that it's causing us, right?
Yeah, and it's something that it's funny, I tell leaders this all the time. Um, let's just put nervous system work aside. In business, what got us here is not going to get us there.
Mm.
And the last 4 years, 5 years have taught us nothing else.
Mhm.
It is that the world is changing, the way we work is changing, the people inside of our work is changing. And what we have been doing to motivate people, to excite people, to keep people engaged, to keep them high performing has to change. It's not the same things that it used to be. And when you think about 4 generations in the workforce who are very differently motivated, who look at the world in very different ways, the ability to say, just this is what I expect from people, like that was fine for a while and it worked for a while. It's no longer working. And we see this over and over and over again. We see the layoffs that are happening. We see companies that are not performing. We see all of these things that are clear indicators that what we have been doing and what we've done up until now got us only so far. We've got to do something different.
Right.
And it is no different with this kind of work, right? It's no different with saying we need to take care of ourselves in a different way, in order to be the most productive that we can be, the most engaged, and the highest performers that we can be. Everybody wants to be a high performer. People
Yeah.
do not walk into their office every day saying, you know what, I want to do even less than the least amount possible. Nobody does that. Nobody does that.
Right.
Now, there are people who are in overwhelm who don't have the capacity to do it. And there are people who are
Right.
in the wrong jobs. And like, there's lots of reasons people don't perform. But
Right.
inherently, people want to do well. They want to be strong performers. They want to feel good about the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so, our job as leaders and companies is to do everything in our power, a lot of things different than we have in the past, but everything in our power to help support that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that is and people, they want to high perform, like you say, but people also want to set up roots.
Yeah.
People don't want to pick up and leave a job. People don't want to go through a lot of turnover. People want to set up roots and invest in an organization. We're humans. We thrive in connection and community. And so we want to do those things. So I think that is the perfect place to end off this conversation. I'm so grateful for what we shared today. The dialogue was amazing. The energy was great. So, do you want to just share with everybody where they can find you and how they can connect with you?
Yes, thank you. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me, or here on Instagram. Either place, I'm Michelle Joy King, or you can go to my website, which is www.michellejoyking.com. Love to hear from leaders, love to hear from people who are just starting to dive into this work. And so we are out in the world putting this out there and doing great things in Canada and the US, and I have a lot of friends doing this internationally. I really think this movement is going to change the way that corporate America works and the way that employees engage with their employers.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Like, I'm so,
Thank
so grateful for
you.
this exchange. I'm so grateful that we've been able to connect. And I just hope this helps a lot of people today in understanding how we can shift the corporate world. Just like you said, what worked before isn't going to work in the future. And hopefully we can make a really impactful change to just make people first and foremost the most important part of everything.
Yeah. thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm really grateful we got a chance to connect here.
Yes, wonderful. And thank you for everyone who
Okay,
joined today, whether you
thank
watched it
you.
live or the replay. We're super grateful. And I hope everyone has a great day.
See you later.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. And we will connect soon.